Hello everyone, how are you? Hope you're doing well. So, I just finished watching a discussion between Yaron Brook and Douglas Murray, and I'm just going to make a few quick comments on it because it turns out that a lot of what they talk about is going to be the subject of some videos that I'm working on at the moment. And I think it'll be beneficial to have this video, and also I'll put a link to the discussion between Brook and Murray because the overall context that's provided will be useful when I'm working on the videos that are to come. So the theme of this discussion was what's killing Western civilization? And I just wanted to comment on a few of the points, especially the ones that Yaron Brook raised during the event. And I recommend that you watch the whole discussion yourself. It's a little under 2 hours, so instead of doing a video where I just pause it and make comments, because that would just be such a long video, I'll just give you some of my thoughts, and then if you want to go watch the discussion between those two yourself, well, the link will be in the description. And I also want to make clear that I admire both men. I think they make good points, and this disagreement doesn't have to mean a criticism or an attack. And I'm also not listening to either of these speakers trying to catch them out or listen for contradictions or gotcha moments. I am genuinely listening to what they have to say. And so, well, let's just get started here. So Yaron Brook and Douglas Murray each opened with about 10 minutes of opening statements. And it was Brook's opening statements which really just rang some alarm bells, or at least just bells, not really alarms. But so he gets right into it, just saying that Western civilization is a set of ideas. That's it. For him, Western civilization is a set of a particular idea, or a particular set of ideas, rather. And this particular set of ideas, it wasn't just something that the philosopher kings could have, these ideas. No, it's any reasonable individual can have these ideas. Anyone can have them. Every sacred individual can think for themselves and be free. It's the gift of the human brain, of our rational thought, logic, things like that. And he gives much credit to ancient Greek society and the Greek development of logic and philosophy. But what ideas? Because Brook then goes on to say that there was a time in history where the ideas of Greek civilization, Greek philosophy, fell out of Western civilization. So they weren't being practiced, the ideas of the ancient Greeks. So did Western civilization cease to exist? Where did it go? Brook says that the Catholic Church restored the sacred ideas of the ancient Greeks, of logic and philosophy and the individual. So there was a period in which Western civilization just didn't exist because the ideas, according to Yaron Brook, the correct ideas of Western civilization weren't being applied or weren't dominant in society. And it just strikes me as something very odd, because what were the ideas of Egyptian civilization? Is Egyptian civilization a set of ideas? Obviously not. Egyptian civilization is the civilization that was created by the Egyptian people. Yaron Brook is a proponent of this, frankly, exasperating idea, but that sounds very, very good. But it's a bit naive, it's a bit of a utopian idea that Western civilization, European civilization, has nothing to do with people. It's just an idea, or a set of ideas. But you wouldn't characterize any other civilization like that. He even goes on to say, Yaron Brook, that many ideas have arisen out of Western civilization. Communism, fascism, religion, Western religions. And he characterizes communism, fascism, and religion as paradoxically of Western civilization, but enemies of Western civilization. So in other words, the West produced some ideas, but they were the ideas that ended up being the enemy of Western civilization, even though they came from Western civilization. So it makes me think of this question. Who's deciding what are the Western ideas, the Western values? If it's possible that Western values and Western ideas can change, and at one moment in history, one idea is in supremacy, and another moment, that same idea that was in supremacy is now declining, and another idea is coming to replace it. Who's deciding that? And he said earlier that it's not decided by philosopher kings. It can be decided by any individual who's thinking for himself. The ideas or the values of Western civilization. So for me, it just seems like in his opening statements, he's making a very interesting and compelling point and a very uplifting point that Western civilization is these wonderful ideas, and they are wonderful. Logic, philosophy, reason, the sanctity of the individual, rights, are all wonderful ideas. But he's completely cutting away the idea and any connected tissue between the idea and the people who came up with them. And the fact that ideas change, but the people remain. Values are the social construct. Values are the social construct. The people are biological. They are there whether or not the ideas or the values are there. So, Yaron Brook also goes on to have this focus on the Enlightenment as sort of the highest ideal of Western civilizations. But the Enlightenment, as Douglas Murray goes on to sort of criticize, the Enlightenment didn't go very deep and it didn't go very wide, is exactly what Douglas Murray says. And if you look at the timeline of history, the Enlightenment is sort of the precursor of radical leftism, Marxism, communism, which I don't think are very good things, and Yaron Brook himself described as enemies of the West, of Western civilization. So Yaron Brook is a brilliant guy, I'm sure. He's got a great mind, he's a great entrepreneur, he's got great thoughts on economics and things, but I think he's looking for this sort of feel-good philosophy, and he doesn't want to make any claims of identity, that the identity of the people, Egyptian civilization belongs to the Egyptians. Doesn't Western civilization, European civilization belong to the Europeans, to the Westerners? And that those claims and those ideas do come up, so it's very interesting. So Douglas Murray then gives his opening statement, and he mentions that 2,000 years of Christian religion is the enemy of Western civilization, and he makes the great point, which comes up many times in his commentary, his videos, his speeches or debates, that you can say you're not a Christian, but the dreams you dream are still Christian. And I'll make some other videos. I'm working on some video about his book, actually, which will be coming up soon, exploring that idea, that mindset. And then Douglas Murray goes on to criticize the Enlightenment as being quite imperfect in the final analysis. And then Douglas Murray makes a great point where he says the problem with Western civilization, if it's dying, if it's being killed, if it's already dead, seems to be that we doubt that we are the source of our own regeneration. So Douglas Murray here makes some small connection between the people of the West and Western civilization. It seems strange that the connection would be small, would be tentative. But if people in the West, especially in Europe, are having these anxieties and these doubts, which Douglas Murray says is not really anything new. Many times Western civilization has been proclaimed dead, and we're still here. And he also says that perhaps it's a good thing that we always have these constant anxieties about our existence, because that's what keeps us going. We don't get complacent. We're thinking about these things. And so in a way, it could be a slightly good mentality to have. But the fact that he says that we doubt that we are the source of our regeneration shows that there is an element of peoplehood, of identity at play here. I think that's really interesting to keep in mind. Another point that comes up later on is that Western civilization suffers a lack of meaning. People need meaning, and Yaron Brook says, well, before the Enlightenment, he actually says people were too poor and too busy to think about the meaning of life. I don't think this man is fully aware of, or I think he's doing something that we've kind of been conditioned to, which is believe that the people of the Middle Ages, or even going back further, were just retarded, completely ignorant, completely without curiosity, without intellect. But he cites the ancient Greeks as the model Western civilization. So the ancient Greeks were thinking about these things. I don't know. Again, I'm not incredibly familiar with Yaron Brook. He's probably smarter than I am. And I'm not going after him. I'm not criticizing him. I'm not trying to catch him out. But these are just things that there's a disconnect between the utopian, feel-good philosophy that he's sort of putting out there and reality, history. So then he mentions that false paths to meaning, dangerous paths to find meaning, are collectivist, they are found within the messy world of identity politics. And I think this is a misunderstanding of identity politics, because it's not played the same way, and it doesn't mean the same thing to the same people. So, in my opinion, identity politics is a problem when it demands that individuals can't think for themselves, and they have to conform to groupthink based on characteristics like their sex or their skin color. So it's when white men get written out of their own history and they are replaced with a minority character. So identity politics, and they do that with the express purpose of pleasing that minority group. So when Joan of Arc is cast as a black woman, for example, or Lancelot is black, or Achilles, and the idea is to put more black positive images into the culture on screen, so that young black children can have some role models, because there aren't that many black heroes of Greek mythology, or there aren't that many black knights in the Arthurian legend. And I understand that I imagine that if you are a young black child growing up and you don't really see any representation of what you look like in these characters, I imagine that, yeah, it would probably bother you, or at least make you ask some questions about, why don't I ever see black knights or black superheroes? And there are black superheroes now. Not to go off on a tangent, but I think now, better than changing the identity of Joan of Arc or Achilles or Lancelot, why not just create a new pantheon of black superheroes? But anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. So identity politics for me, when it's a bad thing, is when it's being implemented in the form of diversity quotas, or when you have the idea that all women must be feminist, because by nature of being women, they must surely agree with all of feminism and all of feminist ideology and propaganda, and In fact, the opposite of that is true. Most women actually don't identify as feminist. But in the identity politics of the left, that's crazy. They can't even fathom that. But like I said, not all identity politics is bad, and it's certainly not all the same, and it's certainly not practiced in the same ways. So there's nothing wrong with Italians, for example, caring more about the things that affect Italy. We would call that nationalism, right? It's not a dirty word, nationalism. And it's not exactly the same as identity politics. And there's also nothing wrong with Black Americans, for example, caring about the issues that affect the community of Black Americans, like discrimination or crime. If a movement is saying we need to do something about discrimination, unfair discriminatory practices, or crime, or fatherless homes, or whatever, and they say it's happening in the Black community, it's happening in my community, I want to improve it, that's not identity politics. That's, I guess a term could be community politics. And there's nothing wrong with that, at least in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments. So they go on to talk about sort of identity politics and meaning, and Yaron Brook eventually and inevitably falls on meaning is found in the individual. Every individual will find their own meaning on an individual by individual basis. But we're living in a time right now of the atomized, isolated individual. Loneliness, feelings of depression, especially in younger generations, are at an all-time high. People feel completely cut off. And it's been revealed through scientific studies many times that people are happier when they feel connected. We are social animals. We live in groups. We form societies. Happiness does come from the support of a group. And I get what he's saying about individualism. And he's right to an extent. But the fact that he just completely removes any potential of group identity being somehow connected to the meaning of life, the meaning of human experience, I think it's wanting. I think it's shallow. I think it sounds intellectual. It sounds good. It sounds daring. And many people do need to hear it, that happiness or meaning will be found in you. Make yourself a better person. Be a better son. Be a better daughter. Be a better neighbor. Those are all excellent messages. But it's not very good at getting big picture meaning for society. And we're talking about, why is Western civilization dying? That's the theme. Why is society as a whole, why is our civilization as a whole, why does it feel so empty? Why does it feel so dead? Okay, so then some other things that Brooke said. Because I don't have too many complaints with Douglas Murray, to be honest. And so I'm going to be focusing a lot more on what Yaron Brook had to say. So he also then made a point that he welcomes anyone who adopts the values of Western civilization. So even a person who is not Western, by adopting the Western values, becomes Western, or at least Yaron Brook, if he was making all the decisions, would welcome them, and they are now Westernized, which I guess is a process that exists. It does happen. People do become Westernized. But then he goes on to say, you take all the cultures and you assimilate them into what he then described as Western, civilized, and real culture. You give them a real culture to assimilate into. And then because he was specifically giving the American model, he goes on to say, well, I don't know if America really has a real culture. That's debatable. Yeah, okay. But the fact that he was giving the unique American perspective, I think, shows a lot. Because nothing suggests that outside of America, anyone thinks like this, nor do they want it. No other country or culture or whatever you want to say seems to be giving any sign of saying that they want to become the American melting pot. People do feel a connection to their history, their ancestry, their land, their religion. It's a deep connection, and it is a meaningful connection. You do get meaning from it, or at least one did. before modernization, you might say. And it's that particular American model of thinking that makes it really, for me, exasperating to talk about these issues with Americans, because they do bring up the American example. America is a nation of immigrants, so why can't, and it's a successful nation, so why can't France become a nation of immigrants just like America? Why are they so worried about it? And I'm going to make some videos on that too, so I'll save that for another time. And then I just had this point about Yaron Brook and welcoming in more people and assimilating all the cultures into American culture, or if he doubts that America has a real culture, certainly into Western culture. America fits within Western culture. But according to my observations, it seems to me that as America becomes more and more diverse, its commitment and connection to Western values are becoming weaker, diluted. Certainly they're being challenged. So that's the problem. If you're not very confident and very strong in upholding your civilization, your culture, and you welcome in untold numbers of people from different cultures to which these new people still are strongly attached and strongly believe in, and they don't have any reason, or they don't see any reason or any appeal for giving up their culture to latch on to one that's apparently dying. Why would they do that? So these are producing a lot of problems. And then Brook even admits that there's a problem with mass immigration. Okay, why? Is immigration of people with different values and different cultures acceptable, but only if it's at a certain rate? Because then what? I would guess the argument is that you can control the assimilation. It's easier to assimilate 5 people than 5 million. Fair enough. But then are we looking at death by 1,000 cuts if it doesn't go right? There's some other thoughts that I was having. He goes on to admit that not all cultures are alike. And this, I know that Yaron Brook does take on the far left and the multicultural left and the sort of limp-wristed left that is afraid to admit cultural superiority. And he goes on to say, though, that some cultures are barbaric and should die. I thought that was interesting because I don't actually want other cultures to die. I'm quite happy that there's other cultures in the world. I'm not so sure I want to live on a planet where there's just one monoculture, and it's Western culture, especially when Western culture has some serious failings. It's why it's on the examiner's table. It's why it's being questioned as, is it even still alive? Then Brook says something that I agree with, which is that what's killing Western civilization is us. And I do agree with that, because it's about us as much as it's about problems that our elites have foisted upon us, or problems that the others are bringing into our societies. It is about us, and we do make bad decisions. We have become very materialistic. We have become very short-sighted. We have no attachment to the sacred, to the divine, to the meaningful. It's become sort of cringeworthy and ironic, anything that is meaningful or deep. We don't want to challenge ourselves. We don't want to look inward. We might be afraid to do that. So yeah, we do have some things that we need to work on ourselves. Okay, some things that Murray said that I liked. He made this point. He calls himself an immigration restrictionist. But at the same time, rather than being a xenophobe, he considers himself a xenophile. He's interested in other cultures. He's curious about other people. And I think that's a great thing to talk about and to express. I love other cultures. I think that the diversity of the world is a good thing. But at the same time, yeah, I don't want them all to come to Europe or dilute Western civilization. If I want to experience Japanese culture, I'll go to Japan. If I want to experience African culture, I'll go to Africa. And of course, throughout history, there's always been mixing and give and take between civilizations. It's unavoidable. I'm not suggesting that we cloister off continents and countries and cultures, but one can be a xenophile without saying, well, because I love Middle Eastern culture so much, what I really want is for Germany to become a majority Middle Eastern populated country. But we have to take these ideas to their logical conclusions. We have to examine them further because, as Douglas Murray's second point talked about, we don't know who are the good and the bad immigrants. We don't want to have that conversation. We don't even want to have that value structure. And there is no plan, certainly in Europe. There was no plan, there is no plan. Angela Merkel said that during the post-war period of taking in foreign workers, the thought was they'd all go home when the jobs were done. They didn't go home. There is no plan. There is no long-term thinking. There is no foresight. We have brought these problems on ourselves, which means that we are also capable of solving them. We have to have the balls to do it and the conviction to do it. So that's where I like Yaron Brook's strong conviction, strong belief in the superiority of Western culture. Okay, so just to wrap up here, they start taking questions after they've given some more statements, sort of challenge each other on some points that they make. And one person from the audience asks more about the question of meaning. And he asks what the speakers, Douglas Murray and Yaron Brook, have to say about the idea of a collective meaning. And Murray answers it by saying that meaning can come from art, specifically, precisely. It can come from our art, European art, Western art, our sculptures, our paintings, our music. He goes on to say that who's done more than Europe to produce great art? But then he has to catch himself. Every time that we big up Western civilization, European civilization, there's always got to be a disclaimer. So he goes on to say, well, we don't want to get into that sort of the fear of German art for German people. Then he references some German sort of nationalist sentiment from the Second World War era. So Murray says, this time, let's say it this way. Our art can be for everyone. Everyone can reach out and take it and participate in the great history and tradition of European art and find meaning in it. And he goes on to say, live in your inheritance, claim your inheritance, do your part to keep it going. But whose inheritance? I can assure you that not all of the world, not the rest, the world that is outside Western civilization, the world that is outside European civilization, they're quite happy with their own civilizations and their own inheritance, and there's no evidence to suggest that they want to consider themselves as the heirs of Western civilization. I mean, economically, financially, there's a lot to gain from becoming the heirs of what the West has built. But my point is, I'm not so sure that an Egyptian or a Chinaman is very interested in inheriting the artistic traditions of the Italian Renaissance. I think they are quite happy with their own traditions and their own inheritance. So whose inheritance is it? Again, the link between civilization and people, they can't help but talk as if it exists, even if they don't say it outright. So I think this is what, to answer their question, what's killing Western civilization? Well, this all-comers welcome mentality is Europe's undoing. It's the West's undoing. The idea that we are just ideas. We don't have any ancestral claim to homelands or a history, an inheritance, a tradition. We're just ideas. The idea of liberty, human rights, ownership of property, logic, and philosophy. That's the West. It's a naive and very glorified. It is uplifting to think about it that way, but it's naive. It's not real. It's not played out in real life. Everyone else knows, yeah, Egyptian civilization was a civilization created by Egyptians. Japanese civilization is connected to the Japanese people. Indigenous American civilization is connected to indigenous American peoples. There is no question about that. But when it comes to European peoples, Western peoples, now there's all this self-doubt and flowery language of ideas. And frankly, even though these ideas are being expressed by wonderful people with whom I agree on many things, and very, very pensive, inquisitive, thoughtful minds, I've got to say, at the end of the day, it's very empty. And it's not going to translate to real-world solutions. You're not going to solve the problem of the dying West by telling everyone that our art can save us. And it's also not even our art. It's for everyone. Everyone is the inheritor. It doesn't work like that. All right, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you like this video, give it a like, and also please help this channel grow by subscribing, clicking that big red subscribe button. All right, take care. See you next time.